When on the press tour for The Irishman, Martin Scorsese was quoted saying, "There are many people who watch theatre for 3.5 hours. There are real actors on stage. You can't get up and walk around. You give it that respect, give cinema some respect." End quote. This was in response to the news that his new film, The Irishman, starring De Niro, Pacino and Pesci, would be 3.5 hours and would not feature an intermission. My question is, have you ever sat through a film and thought, this is just way too fucking long? Most recently I experienced this with The Substance, a film that has a lot to say, is incredibly well made, well shot, well acted and everything else, and yet it spends so much time meandering in the second act that it is difficult to recommend watching it in theatres, as the film doesn't respect your time to have you in and out within a reasonable amount of time, and also is not paced correctly, where the story doesn't feel like it's extending itself for the sake of extending itself. So in this video, I'm going to answer a couple questions that I feel are pretty universal. Are movies getting longer, and why? To take us all the way back to the beginning of cinema, the length of a film depended on the amount of film reel available, meaning that the majority of productions were between 10 and 15 minutes. As more reel became available, the possible runtimes extended until after a few decades, feature-length films were possible on a consistent scale. Once the feature-length film became a staple among studios, it was also utilised as a marketing technique, meaning that the longer the film, the better. Studios would often allow a director to run wild with the length because they could market this film as an epic in competition with television and argue that only epics could offer this sort of experience. If a film came out and was 3 hours in length, studios didn't worry about audiences becoming tired, as there were necessary intermissions in order to switch the reel for the second half of the film. Features that are well known from the mid-20th century and have garnered enduring legacies as epics, such as Lawrence of Arabia and Cleopatra, which came out in back-to-back years, sitting at 3 hours and 7 minutes and 3 hours 53 minutes respectively, and yet were not deemed too long by the audience. But it would seem unimaginable to a 1960s audience to sit through a film of this length with no break. A quote famously attributed to Hitchcock says that the length of a film should be directly related to the endurance of the human bladder. Cinemas have done away almost entirely with the intermission due to advances in technology, which makes the intermission in reel invisible, as well as the monetarily driven desire to pack in more screenings. With a 10 to 15 minute intermission, at least 1 or 2 screenings a day are eliminated, especially if the theatre is packed with films over 2 hours. However, cinema isn't just epics. Even when the epic was mega popular, there were still popular films that were much shorter. 12 Angry Men, for example, released in 1957 and went on to become one of the most well-known films ever at just 95 minutes. However, from the 1980s onwards, films in and around the 90-minute length have increased in popularity, and some of the most popular modern films of all time are around 90 minutes. The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, Beetlejuice, Toy Story, The Addams Family, Reservoir Dogs, Trainspotting, Lord of the Flies. And that is just to mention a few. There are far more that I haven't mentioned. And that takes us to the super recent modern era in which streaming reigns king, and every movie must be fit for purpose on Netflix, Prime, Apple TV, etc. Streaming has radically changed the film industry in ways that aren't even yet quantifiable because of how new these services are. However, one recognisable change in how streaming services differ from the major studios is that they operate much more freely, and as a result, directors can extend their runtimes to more fully explore their chosen themes and topics. Given that these services can offer virtually full creative freedom in this regard, the major Hollywood studios must act in kind, lest they lose projects to the streamers and potentially miss out on major box office pulls. And it's not just streaming services that make films longer, it's also what Hollywood sees at the box office. With major success in the Marvel Universe, enticing studios to make endless barrages of sequels in the hope that they too can catch the fervour of an indelible cinematic universe with the promise of an infatuated audience forever returning. When films such as Infinity War and Endgame reach cinemas, it's almost impossible to envision a competent cut of the film sitting at 2 hours and below, because there is so much that studios need to pack into one film that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you desire an expansionist cinematic universe, your films must become longer in order to satisfy and complete all running plot lines. Furthermore, when these studios push their films onto streaming services, it benefits them to have longer runtimes. Longer runtimes means more watch time. The more watch time means that services can sell more adverts, or the more they can impress potential investors into believing that their platform is impressive and popular, and as such a worthy place to funnel their money in. It's unfair to put all of the blame for this trend on streaming services, however, but it's undeniable that these services are allowing directors to run wild with how long their movies are, whether that be Martin Scorsese's The Irishman and Killers of the Flower Moon extending to 7 hours combined, or other lesser-known directors extending their runtimes to 2 hours and above. In recent months, Jeremy Saulnier, the director of Blue Ruin and Green Room, released Rebel Ridge on Netflix, a film that could be a tight action film with some social commentary. Instead, the film is 2 hours and 11 minutes, and the ending is quite anticlimactic and doesn't feel like the finale of a film. Even more recently, Coralie Fargat released with Mubi The Substance, a good film with genre-twisting body horror and social commentary, but the film overstays its welcome at 2 hours and 11 minutes. Whilst academic and industry professionals may argue that we can't statistically say that movies are definitively getting longer, even anecdotally, we can say this is true. The epic has re-emerged in recent years, particularly with cinematic universes and streaming services. The industry is currently obsessed with longer and longer runtimes, even if it does not on paper mean films are getting longer. But what this has done has killed off the 90-minute runtime. Gone are the days of a 90-minute in-and-out Adam Sandler comedy, or a Jason Statham-led action film that doesn't feel too heavy on the brain. We all want high-quality social commentary films, and we all want Scorsese to be the master he has always been. But does this really mean that there is no space for a film to just be fun, entertaining, quick, and light-hearted? So, now that I've hopefully competently explained, the situation at hand with why films are getting so long now, I wanted to question, what is the effect going to be of these films becoming longer and longer on the industry and on us as audiences? Are we, suddenly going to revert and go back to having 90 or 2 and under hour movies? Or are films just going to get longer and longer? Or are we going to sort of plateau and maybe we'll reach a happy medium where we can have both? Who is responsible for these things? I also want to question, is it the producers, directors? Is it the services themselves? Is it editors in the editing bay? Could they take more responsibility and, you would hope have the ear of their director and be able to shorten the film? And then also, who fixes the situation? Who steps in and says, you know what, we don't like this model anymore. We want to change this and we want to go back to, you can have your 2 hour, 2.5 hour, 3 hour movie, but we also need some directors to be doing 90-minute, 2 hour movies. And how do we get there, if we even want to get there in the first place? So starting off with the effect on, both the industry and us as consumers, it's pretty hard to quantify what the effect is going to be, because I would suggest that the box office suggests, sort of mixed evidence for how audiences feel about longer runtimes. There are some studies that suggest that 90 minutes is the ideal length for what audiences want, yet this isn't reflected at the box office a lot of the time. Marvel movies in particular do exceptionally well. There are others that do exceptionally well that are, 3 hours or longer, or 2.5 hours. So if you think about Titanic, has done exceptionally well. It's one of the highest rated movies ever. The Avatar movies are very long. I believe they're about 2.5, 3 hours. And then, like I said, the Marvel movies as well. What I question with these films compared to the films that have failed at the box office and are 2.5 hours to 3 hours long is, do the movies that are failing believe they have the buy-in of the audience in the same way? So do studios in the modern era believe they have the buy-in for the Indiana Jones sequel that came out last year with a very old and grizzled Harrison Ford? Do they believe they have the bank in the credit for that film? And if they do, why were they wrong? Because that film was a flop. It made around $400 million and yet it wasn't a success. It would have needed to make about 900 a billion dollars to really be considered a success, because it was 400 million on budget, and that's without the marketing. So why did the studio believe that that film would be a success, and why wasn't it? Is it just a simple case of the audience has moved on from Indiana Jones? You know, I wouldn't consider Indiana Jones to be one of the mainstay Hollywood franchises that has had an enduring legacy over the past 40 years. And I'm biased in this case because I'm a lot younger. I'm 23. I'm not a great lover of the Indiana Jones movies, and also I am just using this as an example because it's the one in my mind right now. There are other examples of major flops at the box office, but is Indiana Jones an enduring film, or is it an enduring franchise that has continued to ensure its legacy in Hollywood through various media forms? So if you look at Star Wars, even when Star Wars was on hiatus between the original films and the prequels, and then even when it was on hiatus between the prequels and the modern Disney era, how was Star Wars remaining in the minds of its audience? It was selling merchandise. It had TV shows. It had Christmas specials, although, people often hate the Christmas specials. It had comics. It's now got games that are mega popular. And then alongside the prequels, it also has its standalone films. So I think the reason why Star Wars continues to be so popular, other than it just being the biggest film franchise ever, is also the fact that they've handled it well. Different nowadays, but for a long time they handled Star Wars effectively in terms of making sure it was constantly not at the front of your mind, but at least at the back of your mind, to the point where, they could come out 20 years later and go, oh, we're doing a prequel to those films you love, by the way, so make sure you're there, and you will be there. I don't view Indiana Jones and a lot of these other films that have failed as being as having that pull, because what has Indiana Jones, what is the pull to Indiana Jones been for the last 30 or so years? Has it had comics? Has it had TV shows? Has it sold a lot of merchandise, games? I couldn't really tell you what is the major pull of Indiana Jones between these movies. And I think Hollywood is very sequel orientated, especially now because of the success of the Marvel movies. And it was sequel orientated before that, but it is a lot more so now, because it is chasing that cinematic universe, and the cinematic universe is built on sequel movies. So I think that what films like Indiana Jones and The Dial of Destiny shows is that Hollywood, it lacks in surgical precision for locating the franchises that are effective and have mainstay enduring legacies, and just picking films out from the 80s, 90s that were successful then, so it must be successful now. You could also probably put Terminator in this category as well, because Terminator, other than the first 2 or 3 movies, what is the legacy of Terminator? Do they have great games? Not really. Do they have comics, t-shirts, merchandise? All these things. What is the legacy of Terminator? What is the legacy of Indiana Jones? And there's no surgical sort of, let's find a franchise that the audience really loves, and then we'll make that into the big sequel money-generating machine. Because if you had asked me, do I think my generation will run out and see an Indiana Jones movie on the first weekend? Well, I can tell you I didn't go and watch it, and I'm here on YouTube talking about films for no money. So if I'm not going to go watch it, how many people in my generation are going to go watch it? And that's very anecdotal, but you have to have those anecdotal conversations. If you're an executive at a studio, you have to have those anecdotal conversations with people younger than yourself and go, okay, well, do younger generations buy into this movie franchise because they are the ones who are going to make it profitable? The generations who grew up with Indiana Jones, they might not be here in 20, 30 years. So you need to pick a franchise that is going to stick in the hearts of young people for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And I don't think Hollywood is currently doing that. I think it's still relying on past franchises and hoping to revive past franchises. But what it doesn't realize is that with a lot of these franchises from the 80s, 70s, 90s, a lot of them are already dead. A lot of people my age just don't care about them, and they desire something new. And if they don't desire something new, then they at least desire sequels that are good. This is the reason why after, maybe what would you say, 3, 4, 5 flops, Marvel movies just aren't there profitably anymore, because the audience is kind of fatigued out and decided, okay, we don't really want this anymore. We want something different. And so I think there's a lack of surgical precision that Hollywood has, and there isn't. If you look at why Marvel was successful in the early days, there was an executive at the head of Marvel who believed in his vision so clearly. Is there a executive who believes in the vision of the Indiana Jones franchise completely for the next 20 years? Because I don't think there is. And I think that's an issue with a lot of these companies. If you were looking at Legendary Studios, I would say that they have a couple of visionaries when it comes to the Dune franchise. With Dune, what is a lot different, however, about that is they understand that Denis Villeneuve is the sort of the true auteur in that franchise, and I think once he leaves that, it'd probably be a good idea for them to sort of take a step back and decide what they want to do with it and not ruin it into the ground. Whether or not they do that is a completely different question, however. So I think that is one thing, is that you can't just say this franchise was successful 40 years ago, so we're going to make it successful now. You need to have been working on it for all that time, and if you haven't, you can probably say that it's just going to be a dead horse on arrival. And you need to rid yourself of the weight. Other than that, I would also say that I think a lot of people are just fatigued right now with cinema. I think, and I know I've just said that a lot of studios are chasing that Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that cinematic universe will be what returns a lot of audiences to the cinema. But on the other hand, I will also say that I feel like audiences are very fatigued out by cinematic universes, Marvel in particular, by feeling like they need to go to the cinema, 2-3 times a year in order to keep up with the universe. And if you miss one film, then you're probably screwed and you're not going to be able to fully understand what's going on. And now you have TV shows in the Marvel universe added to that. So you're kind of looking at it going, Jesus Christ, what do I do here? Like there's so much, and I don't know where I'm meant to go. The change in the industry for me that I would hope for is that I want studios to more surgically pick out franchises. And I feel like when people say we don't want sequels at all, I feel like that is more of their heart talking than their head. It's a bit silly to say you don't want any franchises, because there are some films that just deserve a sequel and are in need of a sequel. If you watch Dune Part 1, before it was a Part 1 and it was just Dune, you'd come away from that film going, oh, there's not going to be a sequel. That's pretty dumb, because there's clearly a follow-up here. And you get that in Dune Part 2, and now you're getting a third one. After the third one, that should probably be it. If there's a fourth in the Dune franchise, you'd probably go, oh, well, that's a bit disappointing. Maybe they'll do well with it, but I don't really know if I need to see it. So it's a bit ridiculous, I think, in my opinion, when people say, oh, I don't want a franchise at all. What we do need is that surgical precision to choose which films deserve to be sequels or deserve to have sequels, which of them need sequels, and which of them should just be left at a standalone level we don't need a sequel here. Let's just move on. A studio, and I'm not going to stick to this point too well or too much because people on YouTube already suck them off enough, and I don't need to add to that. But A24, I do think, is doing a pretty good job of that, of just going one and done. This is fine. It doesn't need a sequel. Let's just move on to the next film. However, when it came to Talk to Me, the directors, the Raka Raka, sorry, I forgot their names. I was looking for it. Raka Raka have picked up a sequel. They've written a script for the sequel to that movie, and I think that is a world that could be expanded, but it needs to be done correctly, and hopefully that has been a surgical decision of going, oh, this one, there is something to build on here. There is a world that we could build on. But with Hereditary or Civil War, do you need a sequel for those movies? I don't know. I don't think you do. So it's right to just move on. Hopefully pick the directors up for whatever the next film is and go from there. But not every film needs to be a sequel, but also not every film needs to be standalone. The issue right now in Hollywood is there just isn't that surgical approach. It's much more of a hammer approach of just going, oh, every film, it's successful, we'll give it a sequel. Or it's not successful, all right, bin it. And there isn't that surgical approach of going, can this be successful if there is a sequel? It's just hammer approach all the time. And then there is also the fatigue element. With that, I think audiences... I think the issue with the Marvel franchise is that it reached its end point and it didn't know it. It didn't know... It's interesting with Marvel because I feel like Marvel was geared towards reaching Endgame. And yet, I think in an audience's mind, in my mind in particular, Marvel ended at Endgame. That was it. You're done. You don't need to continue this now. Or if you do want to continue it, take 5 years, take 10 years, realign, find the new set of stars. Hollywood Reporter have just came out with their new Hollywood A-listers. Go poach a couple actors off there. So you've got the next superstars. But they didn't do that. They just continued as if nothing happened. They were coming out with films the year after Endgame, after you've just lost your major star. And so I feel like there is that fatigue. And with Dune, what I really hope for is that after part 3, they just go, okay, that's it. There are other books we can do. There are other things we can do. They've got a game going. They've got a TV show in the works. Let's just, after part 3, take a step back, make the audience want us to come back. And if it's still there in 5 years, then we'll go back. But we're not going to make you feel fatigued and feel like, God, this is just constantly coming out. I feel like it's work to keep up with it. I feel like that is an issue with the audience that Marvel is encountering. They've found a temporary solution in that with bringing Robert Downey Jr. back as Dr. Doom, but I don't think that's a steadfast solution, because after that Marvel movie, is it The Day of Doom? I believe it's called, something like that. After that film, what do you do? Do you just bring Robert Downey Jr. back as a third character? Like, I don't entirely know. So fatigue is something that I feel like Hollywood needs to be better at managing. And currently, they're just going, okay, we'll just run every franchise into the ground. And once that's ran into the ground, we'll just go to the next one, without understanding that Marvel was ran into the ground because it was a cinematic universe. The audience does not then want you to just start another cinematic universe. We've just came off the back of one. We need a break. And unfortunately, that might mean that cinemas or, films take a bit of a hit at the box office. But if we're going to give you 15, 20 years of success at the box office, you need to give us a couple years of just a bit of a lull to go, oh, okay, I want that again. And audiences have now found that. There was a couple years between Marvel being super successful and that first Dune movie, and look at what happened to Dune. It's now the big franchise. It might not go to, Marvel levels, but it's still very successful. And that's a new property for a lot of people who go to watch those films at the cinema. So I think Marvel is in a bit of a state right now. I don't really know if they have the creatives and the executives and the business sort of people to fix this. I feel like it's a bit disheveled right now. It's very focused on the cinematic universe still, and I don't think that the majority of these companies sort of have the ability and have the franchises needed to sort of hold up a cinematic universe. That's unfortunate for a lot of them, but they need to probably understand that the majority of these studios are just never going to make as much money as Marvel, as much as Disney. You're not to that level. That's unfortunate for you, but it's just not happening. Terminator, that's not going to be the new Marvel. Indiana Jones, that's not going to be the new Marvel. Even Star Trek, that's not going to be the new Star Wars. Like, that's unfortunate. You can still be successful, but you're not gonna have that. You're not gonna have the box office returns needed to support a cinematic universe. So just make your movies, be successful, have, maybe a good 5-10 year run, but then go away after that. Like, you don't need to be doing it forever. And even Marvel has learned, oh shit, we probably can't do this forever. And they're probably gonna go away soon. Because even Bob Iger has talked about, we're gonna roll back on the TV shows a bit. We're doing too much. So, moving on to the next questions that I've got. What is the limit on these long films? What is the limit on like, is there a time limit, I'm saying? When is too long? Do we determine if the movie is too long based on who the director is? Is it more about how pacey is the movie? If it's 3.5 hours but it's very quick, is that okay? If it's slow, is that okay? Is it more about the editing? Is it, there's something constantly going on? Like in a Marvel movie, when you go, it's quick edits. It's, it's bang, 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 bang. It's, there's always something going on. You don't feel bored for a section of the movie. Is it that? Do certain films just deserve to be longer because of who their director is, because of the topic that they're approaching? I am again thinking of Scorsese, I'm thinking of Goodfellas, Heat, these types of movies. I'm sort of, and this is a bit pretentious, but I am sort of the opinion that if your movie is approaching 2.5 hours, and definitely if it's approaching 3 hours, you should have firmly established yourself as one of the premier directors of your generation and have the pull needed and necessary to make people still come to see your film, even though it's 3 hours. If it's not, what are you doing? Why would you choose to turn an audience away because your film is so long that audiences just looked at it and went, I don't want to see that. That's too long for me. That's not, that if your film was 3.5 hours, or like The Brutalist that's coming out is 3 hours 55 minutes. If your film is just so long that audiences don't want to see it because of the length, that's not, dumb of them to go, oh, I don't want to spend 3.5 hours on this. That's them going, well, Jesus, like, what's the topic? Is the topic relevant to me? Who's the director? Do I know the director? Have they done stuff before? Is it part of the universe? Am I invested already in it? How quick is the movie? Is it something that is going to keep me interested for 3.5 hours? That's not the audience being dumb. That's them saying, this is my limit. If I'm going to go watch this, you better make sure it's something that I'm interested in. If it's not, you can't complain that they just don't want to sit through that. And it's unfortunate in my brain that someone like Scorsese with Killers of the Flower Moon wasn't able to make a big profit or even to break even with the Killers of the Flower Moon, because that film is fucking great. I love that film. It was one of my favourite films of last year. But how relevant to the majority of the audience is a film about Native American murders? That's just not a topic that the majority of the audience cares about. That's unfortunate, but that's just the reality. And, further to that point, in 2024, how relevant is Martin Scorsese. Again, I feel really bad about saying that. I don't like saying that. But is he one of the premier directors in 2024? I don't know. And, if we are saying that he's the premier director in 2024, what does that say about the state of the industry? That a guy who's deep into his 80s is still one of the best directors. Where are the new directors? Even the directors who are in their 60s, their 50s, their 40s. There's some of them, but do any of them push us to go and see films more than Martin Scorsese? That's a big question. And if Martin Scorsese is still the best at 85, I think that's a bit of a worry, personally. I think that's great for him. That proves his enduring legacy. But that's probably a bit of a worry for the industry. Wouldn't you agree? That's a bit concerning. And then I wanted to sort of question who has the blame for movies becoming a lot longer, and then also for the death of the 90-minute film. I think this is a very hard question to answer because I think the blame has to get shared around. There is also specific cases in which I feel like one or two people are responsible in particular. So I was watching a video today by, I believe the YouTuber is called Vincent Scaria, something like that. I believe the name is South American, so I might be saying it wrong. I might be saying the wrong thing, I'm not too sure. But he was talking about Quentin Tarantino, and after Tarantino's editor died, Sally Menke, his films have, both sort of ballooned in length in terms of they're all above 3 hours now, but also they are very weird in pacing. It feels like his films meander a lot. There's no, if you think of Quentin Tarantino, again, and I know I keep coming to this point, I'm sorry, but I think it's an effective way of conveying what I mean. When you watch a Tarantino movie, you're expecting boom, 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 sex, violence, swearing, drugs, crime, all this sort of stuff. When you watch The Hateful Eight, it's a slow, plodding movie. It feels like you're watching a 3-hour movie. So in the case of Tarantino's films, I would say that the blame mainly lies at his feet because I don't think he's fully understood how to sort of adjust to being the main editor now on his film. He does have another editor, but how can an editor who hasn't worked with Tarantino previously come into working with him and just go, okay, I'm going to tell him like everything that's wrong? So it's very hard for him, I think, to adjust. And with the news that he's only going to have one more film, it feels like a bit of a sad sort of case if he isn't able to adjust and sort of address the concerns that people have had about his last 2 or 3 movies being, paced incorrectly. If he is going to go out on the 10th movie, then you want him to go out correctly and sort of get back to what he was doing correctly. That doesn't mean he needs to turn around and do a 90-minute movie. But I think if he's going to do 2.5 hours, 3 hours, then he needs to do it correctly. He needs to do it, the way he was making films with Sally Menke. And I just wonder if that's possible for him now. And that's harsh to say. That's, it's a situation that he's been put in through no fault of his own. But it's a situation that will really test him as a director. And if he isn't able to adjust, maybe that changes how we view him as a director. Maybe you have to start thinking about, okay, maybe he's not one of the best ever because he doesn't seem capable of sort of being introspective and editing out what is not necessary in his own films. So, like I said, that's pretty harsh, but, for what is meant to be one of the best directors ever, I think you should be harsh. I think he holds himself to a high, harsh standard, so I think that's what we should do as well. I do think blame should also lie at the streamers' feet because they are just giving such unbridled rope for directors to hang themselves with that it's insane. You know, in Hollywood studios, there are producers there to be like, this is unnecessary. You need to cut this out. Audiences won't like this. And a lot of the times, the producers are wrong. A lot of the times the directors are right. Something needs to be there. A film should be 2.5, 3 hours long. It shouldn't cut 40 minutes just for the sake of what a studio thinks is correct. But when I watched Rebel Ridge, I really was like, what the fuck is going on here? I spent like 2 hours 10 minutes just being like, when is this film gonna like get going? And I just felt like it kept walking me through these legal rules and teaching me about American laws rather than going, okay, the law's fucked up. We've given you 5-10 minutes of briefly saying like this is what this guy is up against. We've introduced all the main characters. You know who the villain, the hero is. All right, let's get to like fucking some shit up, and that just never happens, and that's unfortunate for me in that film because I felt like Aaron Pierre is pretty good. He's gotten the Green Lantern job off of the back of being an action hero in this film, but also a thinking man's action hero. That's fine, but there's so little like good pacing in this movie. It just plods along. It's so like you can't even refer to this as an action movie. It's pretty boring, and it just to me seems like Jeremy Saulnier. It just seems like wanted to go, okay, I want to do this as a thinking action film. I want people to know about like the American justice system and to understand how cops are able to legally corrupt themselves. That's understandable, but I also just wonder, where was the streamer, Netflix in this case, going, yeah, that's great, you can have that, but also like, where is the action in this movie? Where is like the climax? Because they just never hit that, and it just feels like he was allowed to do whatever he wants and was given complete creative freedom, because that's how these streamers operate. They don't have very strict producers who go, no, this is what the studio wants. This is what the streamer wants. You have to do this. And I feel like in that case, I feel like we're losing out as an audience because that there isn't a producer there to go like, you need to cut this, you need to add this. This scene is unnecessary. Okay, I understand you want to talk about the American justice system, but can you do that in 5 pages rather than 10 pages? And there just isn't anyone there who's telling these directors how to do that. And it's not, in my opinion, I don't think the directors are actually to blame for this. I think directors are always going to want their movies to be longer because they're always going to want to explore the topics more deeply that they find interesting. So that's just, in my opinion, that's not their fault. I feel like, I feel like ultimately the director should push for what they feel is correct, which is usually longer movies. I feel like it's on the producers, it's on the streamers, and it's also on the studios to have a bit of backbone and go, okay, but can you make this a bit more palatable? I understand that you want to be a thinking man's action film, but can you be a thinking man and an action hero? And I don't think you get that from a film like Rebel Ridge, and I think that's probably what you need a bit more of, is this, again, what I'm talking about, a return to sort of just light-hearted, fun, entertaining action films and comedy films that I just don't feel like you're getting a lot of now. You know, if I ask you, what's the big comedy films that have came out in the past 5 years, how many can you name me that have been like really successful, whether that be commercially or just critically? I can't really name many. There's Bottoms, and I would say Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is a bit of it's a satire. It's not really a comedy, but it's a satire. Other than that, I'm not really sure how many you can name, because it just feels like if a film is going to be 2 hours, 2.5 hours, can you keep an audience laughing for 2.5 hours? I feel like it's a lot easier to keep an audience intrigued in some criminal element, some thriller, psychological horror element for that amount of time than it is to keep an audience laughing. And I feel like Hollywood has almost done away with the comedy. And if you're doing away with the comedy, you're probably also doing away with the 90 minutes. And I feel like that's very, I'm not a fan of that, because what if you just want your kid to see some, like, maybe R-rated comedy that they shouldn't probably be watching, but also it's like, oh, it's 90 minutes, a bit of fun, it's, dick jokes, whatever. It's not that big of a deal for them to see this. And I feel like we're sort of taking that away, and we're going, okay, if you want to be in a film, you're going to sit here for no less than 2 hours. And that's really unfortunate, in my opinion, because I feel like you should be able to appreciate a 90-minute film and also a 3-hour film. And right now, I feel like we're just being taught to enjoy 3-hour films, and that's it. And I feel like that's a bit of a sad thing. It's a bit of a disappointing thing. And I think that brings me quite directly on to my final question, and I won't stay on this too much because I feel like I've already answered this. But, who fixes this situation? Who brings back the 90-minute movie? And who says, okay, you can have your 3-hour film, but also not every film needs to be 3 hours. And directors also, and streamers and studios also need to learn how to edit films, how to pace films correctly, how to cut scenes that aren't relevant. Who fixes all of that? And I honestly just feel like that's on the consumer, ultimately. It's on the consumer to go, yeah, we like Dune, but maybe we don't like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania because we don't really care anymore. And this film is 2.5 hours, and I don't want to spend 2.5 hours watching this film because I don't really care about Ant-Man like that. I feel like that's on us. I feel like it's also on us to go, you know what? Yeah, I liked Killers of the Flower Moon. I like The Irishman. I like The Brutalist, whatever. But you know what I also like? I like Bottoms. I like I Know What You Did Last Summer. I like these 90-minute films that are just fun, that also have a bit of social commentary in them, but they didn't need 2 hours, 2.5, 3 hours to tell me what their socially responsible point was. They just needed 90 minutes in and out, laugh, bit of slapstick horror, whatever, and they're able to convey a point and get out. And I feel like that's on us to go, oh yeah, those films exist. Why don't we go back and watch some of those films? Show streamers and studios and that, like, yeah, we like this as well. And I don't know if, like, we're doing that necessarily. When true crime documentaries that are 10 episodes long are the most popular thing on Netflix, all right, well, they're going to give you 10 more hours. And how many of those things have people watched and gone, you could have done this in 5, you could have done this in 3 episodes? And Netflix, more than most, is really guilty of that, of extending their TV series because it extends their screen time. And it's the same with the movies. It extends their screen time. So why would they not let directors run wild with it? And I think it has to be on us to be more picky with what we watch, which is also really interesting that I say we have to be more picky and then also go back and watch these, sort of silly, dumb horror films like I Know What You Did Last Summer, like Scream and that. It's interesting because we used to say, oh, I'm picky, I won't watch dumb horror films like Scream. And now I'm saying, if you want to be picky and you don't want every film to be 3 hours, you should just go and watch those sorts of films, those dumb films, and tell Hollywood, I just want to be entertained right now. I don't need this serious film about the Holocaust every time you do a film. It can be something else. You can just make me laugh. You can just make me scared for 90 minutes. And, I might be completely wrong because as the box office shows, there are still a lot of people who enjoy the longer films. I enjoy some of the longer films as well. I'm going to probably go and watch The Brutalist when it comes out in cinemas. But that doesn't mean I just want that. I've seen it in myself when I've gone a week of just watching films that 2 hours and above. Sorry. I've seen it in myself to go, you know what? I think I just want to watch a comedy, watch something dumb, Watch some film, let's watch some horror film where you're going, oh, she definitely shouldn't go down the stairs. Oh, she went down the stairs anyways. Oh, she's dead. Yeah, she's a dumb character, but like, is that just what I want right now? Maybe it is. And I feel like we need to be more selective in what we choose to watch. And we're not doing that right now. Because I feel like the Marvel movies taught us, like, you're bought into this. You need to keep going. And if you're not bought into this, you're not going to know what is going on when we reach the end point. And I feel like we're still sort of emerging from that. And it's going to be interesting to see how the industry and how consumers adapt. Because right now, the industry is still chasing the franchise movies. They're still chasing those mega successful films, which is understandable for their profit lines. But I don't feel like there are many people who are really interested in those right now. If you look at the box offices of films like Killers of the Flower Moon, that film just wasn't successful. So it's going to be interesting to see if we're able to reach what I want, which is a happy medium of having films like Dune, which are 2.5 hours, 3 hours long, but then also having your horror films, your comedies that can just be tongue-in-cheek slapstick. I hope we get there. I'm not entirely confident that Hollywood will figure it out on their own, and that's why I say is that I think this is on us. I think we have to be more picky. I think we have to be selective with what we watch. But I hope it turns around, because if it doesn't, then there are other industries like, games, TV shows that will eat Hollywood's dinner, whilst Hollywood isn't even at the table. And that's a worry for me, because I want films to be great. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Bye. Have a good day.